Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let's do something a little bit unlovely, and that's mix together Putin in the same breath with a great political thinker. And I want to do that because as Putin's army loses more and more badly, he is going to be looking out for two things. One of them we're going to talk about another time, and that's the long-term game of the West destabilizing itself. But as well as that, he's also going to be looking for, is this working? I think it is, for luck, for some kind of circumstance to arise that is perhaps unpredictable, which will allow him to take an unpredictable action in response to it and sort of, to some degree, reset the chessboard. And he, in a quite self-indulgent way, that's my reading of him, fancies himself as somebody who is good at getting lucky. I mean, that's why he was so proud of the 2014 operation in Crimea. It wasn't something that was simply planned and rigidly implemented. It was that a set of circumstances arose, and then Putin said, yes, that's what we got to do. So let's say a little bit about a very sophisticated picture of luck that 500 years ago the great political thinker Niccolò Machiavelli paints for us, and then circle back to Putin, because Putin is kind of relying on a shit version of what Machiavelli put together. And Machiavelli in The Prince, and I was thinking that maybe this video should go on the philosophy channel, but it shouldn't. I think it's simple enough. It's everyday dinner table conversation enough to be okay for us, I think. In chapter 25 of The Prince, and The Prince is not what you think. You think Machiavelli's Prince is some kind of guidebook for how to be sort of ugly and maintain power illegitimately and be a horrible meanie who is brutal and kills lots of people. No. The Prince is one of the greatest meditations on the place and power of intuition in politics, and on the ethics of maintaining power in a sustainable way. And the book is not just an interesting set of reflections about political experience, it's also literary work of the highest level. But in chapter 25, Machiavelli invites us to think a little bit differently about luck for political leaders to how we normally might think about it. And he says, look, you've got to begin imagining that there is more than just foreseeable events for which a politician can be held responsible, and then unforeseeable events for which they can't. There is also a way in which you can dance with unforeseeable events, in which they half leave you necessarily in a position where you're out of control, but half don't. So, as Quentin Skinner likes to say, who is a very important intellectual historian, in his lectures about Machiavelli, that Machiavelli is really talking about what in the modern world we might talk about as making our own luck. And there are two images that Machiavelli has in chapter 25. One is the image of a river, and he's thinking of the Arno River in Florence. And the other image is a very politically incorrect image. It's impossible to write in the modern world, but Machiavelli wrote it. And it's so unlovely that almost all translations have watered it down. So let's look at Machiavelli's couple of images, starting with the benign metaphor of the river. I reckon it may be true that luck decides the half of what we do, but it leaves the other half more or less, to us. It's like one of those raging rivers that sometimes rise and flood the plain, tearing down trees and buildings, dragging soil from one place and dumping it in another. Everybody runs for safety. No one can resist the rush. There is no way you can stop it. Still, the fact that a river is like this doesn't prevent us from preparing for trouble when levels are low, building banks and dikes so that when the water rises the next time, it can be contained in a single channel and the rush of the river in flood is not so uncontrolled and destructive. Fortune's the same. It shows its power where no one has taken steps to contain it, flooding into places where it finds neither banks nor dikes that can hold it back. So, with this metaphor, he is laying down one idea, which is the idea of being instinctively and appropriately prepared and cautious about how one prepares for things that might happen. One can't predict them, but one can somehow intuit them, smell them to some extent, and there is a way of doing something before they happen that means that when they happen, you are prepared. Now, on top of be cautious and prepared, he also says be audacious, and that's his second unlovely metaphor. And in typical translations, it's given to us like this. I certainly think that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a woman, and if you want to control her, it is necessary to treat her roughly. And it is clear that she is more inclined to yield to men who are impetuous than to those who are calculating. And that's not as bad as what he really wrote, which has actually been, for the first time ever in English, rendered beautifully by Tim Parks, who is a wonderful novelist who lives in Italy, in his translation of The Prince. And here is Tim's rendition. Fortune is female, and if you want to stay on top of her, you have to slap and thrust. You'll see she is more likely to yield that way than to men who go about her coldly. So this physically inappropriate, violent chauvinism is also sexually inappropriate chauvinism. And it's very important to render it to get the flavor of what Machiavelli was saying. So we're going to be cautious, we're going to be impetuous, but then there is also something else that's much harder to quantify that happens to great leaders when certain moments come and they react to them. And what separates the greatest leaders is how well they react to these moments. And that's a matter of a kind of property that Machiavelli calls virtù, which, as Machiavelli is a great thinker, isn't going to have a definition. Virtù is something like the qualities that a leader has that allow them to successfully negotiate good luck and bad luck and attain glory without losing power and while maintaining the state. Mantenere lo Stato is a very, very important line for Machiavelli. And it's part of that set of qualities that there is something that's really real there about how great leaders react to these special circumstances, occasione, that come along and expose their political intuition as being intuition of genius or not. And probably in that light, Machiavelli would say that for all of Gorbachev's extraordinary successes of using occasions that came his way to make change, he also, of course, failed to react to the occasions that came his way with this sort of exploitation of fortuna via one's remarkable qualities to take advantage of rare and unpredictable occasions when they come along. And why have I given you this sort of story? Because Putin would never read this. It's far too complex for him. Putin likes to read, most people I respect guess, trashy war fiction. So I share it with you because I do genuinely believe that Putin is fancying himself to climb out of the mess he's now created by taking advantage of some unexpected occasions that come along and throwing something into the wheel, doing something unpredictable when these new circumstances arise, and is sitting there and waiting for these circumstances, while of course doing his mantenere lo Stato. So we've got to be aware also, of course, here of Putin's remarkable talent for preemptive action, for preempting threats to his power. That's a very important consideration when a lot of very admirable Russia commentators on YouTube are now talking about Putin potentially losing power in 2 or 3 months. I mean, he might, but it's just as likely that he'll beat not just Ukraine, but all of the West, than it is that he will just lose power in 2 or 3 months. So this sort of slight sense I've given you of this extraordinary work of political literature from 500 years ago is one of the things that actually right now Putin is waiting for. And he doesn't know what that thing is going to be, but he fancies himself as being someone who might have various kinds of flaws. But one of the things that isn't a flaw for him is his capacity to respond with great talent to unforeseeable circumstances. So he is in this predicament of feeling vulnerable, but also feeling a certain measure of deliciousness about the possibility to take advantage of unforeseeable events that might come along. And deliciousness is the right word because of Putin's extraordinary indifference to loss of life on the Ukrainian side and loss of life among his soldiers. He is playing this. So I hope this was helpful in some way. Thank you so much for tuning in.